Welcome to the Sober Nation FM podcast, where we're putting recovery on the map. I'm your host, Jonathan Sylvester. This show is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Do you want to take your recovery to the next level? Do you want more support, community, and fellowship? Sobriety Engine is an incredible free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. You can get a ton of great tips, resources, and guidance to help you succeed in recovery and in life. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. Sober Nation FM is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle, all while supporting your sobriety, then you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Nation, let's hop right into today's episode. Today, I'll be speaking with the former editor-in-chief for Details Magazine and author of the new book, As Needed for Pain, Dan Paris. Thanks for joining me today, Dan.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, man, I want to dive right in to your new book, As Needed for Pain. And this is all about your struggle with opioid addiction, correct?
That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay. All right. So what was life like before you actually found your way into recovery?
Oh, man. Before I found my way into recovery, life was challenging, lonely, terrifying. I was in a constant state of fear. I was constantly high. I was taking pills from the moment I woke up in the morning to the moment I can't even say went to sleep, but ultimately just sort of knocked myself out.
Okay. Wow. Wow. Yeah. I heard someone in a 12-step meeting one time, and I identified with this immediately, say, people were talking about triggers and stuff like that. And he said his trigger was opening his eyes in the morning.
That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. I mean, and it got to a point pretty quickly, if I'm being honest, where I really didn't need triggers. It just became the chemical makeup of my, I just needed them. And of course I craved the high, but ultimately it was really, maintenance just for me to be able to feel like I had the energy to go about my day, right? Because that's the great sort of myth. This is how powerful the addiction is. I was convinced, and this is true of so many people, this is certainly not just me, that I actually needed those pills to fuel my body. I was convinced more than food, more than water, more than rest, more than anything else, that these pills were my fuel, that they were giving me the energy to go through my day.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So my drug of choice, if you will, at the end of the day ended up being pain pills. And I think you were kind of talking about this on social media the other day. Like, thank God, I definitely thought about stepping up to the next logical thing for a lot of people, which unfortunately is heroin. And I didn't, like, I think you didn't either. But yeah, I never thought about it directly like that, it being fuel, but that's exactly what it was in my mind, because I couldn't even if I wasn't going through withdrawals, I mean, I couldn't even function. I couldn't get off the couch. I could barely pick up my phone to send a text message or something. So how did all of this start? How did you start taking the pills? Like, what was the progression with all of that?
It's a fairly common tale, right? I injured myself. Now, I injured myself doing something stupid and embarrassing, which I'll tell you about in a second. But I injured myself. I ended up needing to have surgery, a very routine procedure on my back. I was prescribed opiates along the way. And for me, ultimately, it was like lighting a fuse on a stick of dynamite. It really was. But to circle back, listen, I was never comfortable in my own skin.
Hmm.
I was never felt like one of the guys. I never felt like I fit in. And so in my middle 20s, trying to impress a woman whom I didn't even know, by the way, I inexplicably decided to do a cartwheel in the lobby of an office building in downtown Manhattan.
Okay.
And I came crashing down on this marble floor
Oh man.
and I injured my back. And it's just, I wish it were a different story. I really do. But that's what happened, and I ended up needing back surgery, and like I said, took these pills, and more or less was off to the races.
Okay. And so was there anything, like for my story and a lot of other people, there's, in retrospect, like once we get to kind of look back on this stuff with a little different perspective, so to speak, we can kind of see like, okay, yeah, there were some things, there were some clues that maybe I should have seen, like, yeah, I should have been more careful taking those pills, or because you're saying it seems like a fuse was lit. Looking back, were there any signs that like maybe you should have been a little more cautious with something like that, or was it just like I hadn't done anything in excess before, the pills came into the picture, it was a good fit, and then I was doing my thing?
Listen, I smoked a lot of pot and played around with a couple of other drugs. Nothing to excess.
Okay.
I drank, I think, like anyone else might in their early 20s. I don't know that I drank alcoholically. I certainly today identify as an alcoholic. There's no question about it. But uh, for me, I think I I finally felt at home for the first time once I got these pills in my system. And I don't mean to romanticize it because that's not what I'm doing. But at the time, I felt um, whole, and
Mm,
I had never really felt whole,
right.
and so these pills did something to me that I wasn't able to achieve on my own, living, what many might refer to as a healthy, normal life.
Yeah.
Um, and so it progressed very quickly with me. But there's also, I think anyone that is exposed to these pills for even a finite period of time of consistent use is going to become dependent on them.
Sure.
And so like those people, I became dependent on them, but then I developed a massive addiction to them as well, and couldn't stop taking them, and really, they were as important to me, if not more important to me than anything else in my life.
So it sounds like what you're touching on a little bit, and I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but there are people, anyone can get addicted to drugs like this, physically dependent, right? But to me, what you're saying is, it filled that hole that it was maybe not easy for you to see, but you can see now that it was your solution to a different degree than just making you feel good physically. You were more than just physically dependent on these pills.
That's correct. And I think, right. I think we now know that the pharmaceutical companies really sort of falsely minimize the risk of addiction when talking about these drugs to
Yeah.
doctors and other people,
Right.
and doctors were encouraged to prescribe more and more and apply opiates to broader uses. They were sort of told that they were ignoring patients' pain, and so I think anyone that comes in contact with these drugs and takes them for some prolonged period of time, becomes dependent on them, and needs to kind of manage that. In my case, in the case of other people that developed full blown addictions to them, but certainly in my case, I got something more from them than just a treatment of pain,
Hmm.
and ultimately um, felt pain when I wasn't taking them, right? And so, I mean, like emotional pain, acute withdrawal symptom pain, things like that.
Okay.
And I really absolutely needed them. They were crucial for me to to do anything, Jonathan, to
Hmm.
absolutely do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, I'm sure some of the listeners can as well, but I can relate to that 100%. I mean, it got to a point where I really like your analogy, fuel. I had never really thought of it that way. I literally could not do anything in life, even the most basic things, if I didn't have the drugs I needed. So I really like to, on this show, make sure that we're focusing more on the solution to this addiction deal than the addiction itself, the problem, if you will. But I do want to ask, I know some of the lengths that I went to in order to get these pills for myself. What were some of the things that you were doing to make sure that you had your fuel?
Right. Um, and I agree. I think conversations like this, certainly for an audience like yours, need to be solution based. I totally agree, and I look forward to that part of this conversation. Um, I would do anything and everything to get these pills. It's
Mhm.
important for me to explain that I was in a position where I was running this national magazine. I was earning an excellent living, so I had some money in my pocket, and I was able to get them, somewhat easily for the most part. Also, it's important for me to say that this was between the years 2000 and 2007, when doctor shopping was a whole hell of a lot easier to do than I would imagine it is now.
Yeah,
That's not to say that it's impossible now, because I suspect it's not.
sure.
But I was able to go see three or four different pain management specialists
Hmm.
in New York, and I would see them each once a month. Of course, they didn't know that I was seeing anyone else. So, and I would get big prescriptions from them, but that ultimately wasn't enough, right? As the addiction progressed and I
Yeah.
started needing and taking more and more, I needed to find other ways to get them. So I once went down to Tijuana with a ton of cash in my
Mhm.
pockets and bought illegally 1,000 Vicodin, put them in the trunk of my car, and crossed the border with them.
Mm.
I will tell you that it was a harrowing experience. I didn't realize that there would be dogs at the border sniffing around cars. And I literally had this moment, and I write about this in the book, where I was
Yeah.
like, oh shit, can dogs smell pills?
Smell pills. Yeah.
Because I'm fucked if they can.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, so here I am, like gripping the steering wheel,
Mm.
slowly inching toward the Border Patrol checkpoint. And these border agents are kind of weaving in and out of the slow moving, they're on foot with dogs on leashes, and the dogs are sniffing their way around. And I was like, oh my God, this is gonna be it. But it wasn't, and I was able to cross, successfully back into California. Um, I even now again back in the early 2000s, and I would imagine this has changed. Doctors could call a prescription for Vicodin into a pharmacy.
Right. Right.
And so I impersonated a doctor and I've called prescriptions in for myself.
Wow.
Um, just horrible. The lying that I did, right, Jonathan? Like, let's be honest, right? Like, we raise con artistry to its highest form,
Oh man,
right?
the keeping track of the stories was just like, where my mind was, I really don't know how I held this web of lies together. And I probably didn't very well, was the truth.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think we did it flawlessly
Right.
and
No one
brilliantly.
knew.
I ultimately, I'm sure the cracks were showing,
Yeah, yeah.
but I would con these doctors, and I would often have to come back before the prescription was, the prescription initially was designed to last a month from any one of the doctors that I was seeing.
Okay.
I started going back to their offices 2 weeks after they prescribed them to me, and I would have to do this whole song and dance. No, 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 I'm traveling. I'm going on a 3-week trip. I'm going to be in Asia and Australia. I'm going to be in Europe. And I would actually have my office print out like an itinerary from the travel agent, actually
Wow.
showing a flight schedule that
Yeah.
I would never take this trip, by the way. But I would go into the doctor's office, and I would, of course, be put out by it. I'd be like, oh, this is awful. I hate all this travel. I'm so sorry to bother you, but
Mm.
my prescription's going to run out while I'm away. So I was wondering if you might be able, and I would do all of these things. And again, I would come in a suit and tie, even if I didn't need to have on a suit that day, right?
Yeah.
That was my costume. I would
Yeah.
put it on because I believed that I was more convincing that way. That this guy didn't look like an addict, I thought to myself.
Mm.
I don't look like a junkie or an addict. I look like a clean cut guy. The joke, of course, is that I, like so many other addicts and people suffering with this disease, are hiding in plain sight, just like I was.
Mm.
So I came up with some pretty elaborate bullshit to con the doctors out of more. I would go to emergency rooms and try to get pills if I was running out.
Yeah.
And when I was in withdrawal, and that's just like an awful experience.
Yeah.
But what's almost worse, and I say almost worse, was the fear of withdrawal. So
Yeah.
for me, knowing that it was coming
Right.
was crippling.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I was just having a conversation with someone the other day about the withdrawals, and I remember I think this just speaks to how much of this is mental, right? It's not just the physical part, because I would be going through withdrawals, and there were times where I would get my hands on some pills, through one of these elaborate bullshit schemes that you're describing most of the time. And I wouldn't even have taken the pills yet, and I would feel relief.
Yes. Yes. I would feel that relief on my way to the doctor's
Yeah.
office. I would, if it was a Monday and
Mhm.
I was out of pills
Mm.
and I was seeing the doctor either later that day or even, let's say, on the following morning, a Tuesday morning, I would feel awful that Monday. But when I woke up that Tuesday morning, knowing that I was on my way
Yeah.
to get more pills, I could breathe a little easier. I, had a little bit more energy and strength, and that's how bad it gets. Jonathan, if I took a taxi, say, to a doctor's office, living
Mhm.
in New York City at the time, I would get out of the taxi and I would begin my charade. I would begin my con the moment I climbed out of a taxi cab.
Yeah, because they're
I would,
watching.
because exactly, because they could be watching,
Yeah.
and I would limp and I would drag my leg and
Wow.
I would hobble up the stairs of this office and into a waiting room
Mm.
where, incidentally, there were real patients suffering from real pain sitting there with their walkers or wheelchairs and canes.
Yeah.
And I would step over all of this sort of stuff and I would ease myself down into the chair like an expectant mother, and I would wince and let out audible groans and sighs. I mean, this was Oscar worthy performance. And I did it all of the time.
Yeah.
And so, but listen, walking into a pharmacy and getting that filled, watching the pharmacist, the almost euphoria of watching the pharmacist spill out the pills from the larger bottle that they get from
Wow.
from the
Yeah.
manufacturer
Yeah.
onto that little tray to count them out. That was a buzz. That was a high. This is
Mm.
how far gone I was.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense to me. I mean, I'm really visualizing and almost like reliving this a little bit as you're saying that, because yeah, that was absolutely true for me too. So, all these things that you're touching on, you're essentially running this magazine that's getting like great awards, and you're making great money, you're looking good. I mean, I've got to ask, because to some degree you would be what would be considered a functioning addict, right? I mean, things are looking good on the outside. So I think that in my mind, this points out a really just part of the what the unmanageability of this disease is really about, because it's for a long time I think that I was thinking it was just about what's on the outside, right? Like it's the job, it's the money, it's how things look. As long as things on the outside look good, it's not unmanageable. But what I started to see was it's really what's going on in here, and it's what's going on in here. That's and how I feel about myself when I look in the mirror, right? That's the unmanageable part. So at what point did this kind of start to click for you that there was something bigger going on? Like this was a real problem. When did that unmanageability in your mind really start to set in?
It always set in when I would run out of pills,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So it was never, quite frankly, anything that I was really that was top of mind for me when I had a supply of pills.
Okay.
When I would run out, I would think, "Oh wow, this is actually really bad, and I'm probably an addict,
Hmm.
and uh, like maybe I should stop." And there actually, came a time early on, in the period of time where I was actively using, where I ran out and I thought, okay, you know what? I'm done. Now, listen, I said I'm done dozens and dozens of times, too many to recall, if I'm being honest. But the first time I said, you know what, I'm done, I actually went to see an addiction specialist. I was prescribed these self injections of buprenorphine, and they were going to help manage the physical symptoms. And I went back to that same addiction specialist, and I got prescribed those injections also more times than I can count. But what I realize now is that I was just kind of using that doctor to manage withdrawal until I could get more pills. I didn't really want to stop,
Yeah.
I was so this addiction had such a tight grip on me that it wasn't letting me go anywhere. And so, but I was aware that it was bad, and I would take, I would save my biggest high of the day for the evening,
Mm.
when I didn't have to interact with anyone, when I didn't have to go out anymore, when I could just fully zone out or nod out or pass out. And I would take, let's say it was Vicodin, I would take 15 extra strength Vicodin, and I would say, oh, it's nighttime. You know what? I'm going to take a couple more. And I would actually say to myself, sometimes even out loud, Jonathan, you know what? Like if I take two more, that actually might kill me. Like this might actually be bad. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to do it. And I had, I didn't have a death wish, not that I'm aware of. I didn't want to die,
Yeah.
but I was willing to. It was a price that I was willing to pay to get
Wow.
a higher high and a bigger
Yeah.
buzz.
Yeah.
And now when I think about that, I'm sober 12 plus years. When I think about that now, when I hear myself say that to you now, I go, holy shit, like that's just the worst possible thing is to be in a position where you know what you're doing might kill you, but you're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's where I found myself.
Hmm. Yeah, that's scary. And I've said many times, I think looking back, I mean, and it's almost kind of sick how we can like laugh about this stuff now. But
Yeah,
I mean, I remember thinking that I wasn't even 30 years old, at the time. And I remember thinking when I was like really in the depths of my addiction, and I remember thinking, this is going to kill me, and I'm okay with it.
correct. And I remember thinking the exact same thing. And it's really interesting what you just said as almost like an aside, which is like it's a little kind of unusual that we are able to laugh at these
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
right? And so I want to say something about that if I
Sure.
can, because
Yeah.
I have said that a number of times, and it's true, right?
Mm.
Um, there's nothing, and obviously you're not suggesting, of course, that there's anything remotely funny about this. I know that,
Yeah, of
but
course.
it's important for me to say that like this is a horrible, awful affliction, and it is brutal. And when you're in the throes of it, it is absolutely just crippling.
Mm.
Um, but when you are in recovery and when you attend 12-step meetings with some frequency, which I do, you start to hear people share stories about these, awful catastrophic events in their lives, these near misses that they've had throughout the course of their active use of whatever they're using. And they tell these stories, and we do sit in these rooms, we nod, we identify, but we also laugh, and
Yeah.
maybe it's a weird defense, maybe it's just like a weird thing, I don't know what it is, but we do. It's like, oh my god, that's nuts, because it is nuts. And I think we celebrate each other, and the fact that we are alive to tell and share these stories. So I will laugh sometimes about these stories, and my book is funny at times. This is not some heavy memoir. It certainly has its moments. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
bring levity to it because it was like a bad movie in some aspects.
Mm.
So if I laugh at or make a joke at or look back on a really horrific episode in my life, one of the lowest lows of my life, and I make a joke about it, I'm not poking fun at addiction. I'm
Sure.
not, trying to get a laugh. It's just, I'm so fucking grateful
Mm.
that I am where I am today. And I did so much unbelievable, almost inexplicable stuff that it is kind of funny to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I've heard people say that like that are in 12-step programs, for instance, like, man, I walked into my first meeting or first couple meetings and people were laughing and I was like, what the hell are these people laughing about? But for me, I think humor has just always been an important part of my life, and it is cathartic, right? I mean, to be able to laugh about it. But when I could see that there were other people laughing about these like pretty like crazy situations, I think a big part of what that gave me was hope. Like that,
Yeah.
the being able to laugh about it gave me a lot of hope because it's like, holy shit, like this guy's laughing about, wrecking his car 6 times or whatever and like, walking away with, I mean, just sick stuff. Other people would hear these things. Like my wife is used to it now and she kind of laughs at the stuff too. But like initially it's like, why the fuck are you
Yeah, what's so funny about
laughing about this
it?
near death experience, you know?
but we've lived to tell the tale, and nothing shocks me anymore, right? So I
Mm,
recently posted an excerpt from my book on my social media,
hmm.
and it's this story about me being out in LA, hosting, as I had to do with some regularity because of my job, hosting an event for like some celebrity or something like that. And I was miserable. I had run out of pills. I tried. I spent like a chunk of the afternoon in Los Angeles before this event trying to find a doctor in LA
Sure.
that would prescribe me drugs, and I just struck out at every turn.
Yeah.
So I had made the decision, as I think many people do in this unfortunate position, to try heroin. And I never have tried heroin, but I definitely tried to get some this night after this party that I hosted. And I ended up getting chased by this one-legged drug dealer, and it was just like this horrible thing. And I can laugh about it now.
Yeah.
But I posted this excerpt of the book on my social media, and I got all of these messages from people that are like, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you're okay," and sending big hugs and sending you strength and all that. And I'm like, hey, look, I'm, right now today, right? Because it's a 24-hour reprieve. At least that's the way I look at it. Like,
Yeah.
I feel great. Like, I'm the healthiest I've ever been,
Yeah.
and I'm sober for, since 2007. But like, what I'm realizing is that I'm shocking these people. I'm not trying to shock these people, but what's dawned on me is that I'm shockproof now.
Hmm.
Nothing really shocks me anymore because I feel like over the years I have heard just one horror story after the next. I have heard just one um, tale of an elaborate scam after the next, and I've heard one sort of near miss. It's a miracle I'm alive story after the next.
Yeah.
And so nothing really shocks me. And so I'm inspired by these stories always to this day.
Hmm.
But nothing makes me clutch my pearls, so to speak, and go, oh my God.
Yeah.
And so now that people outside of recovery are being exposed to my stories, or let's just say my story, they're having this like, spit take kind of reaction to it. And I'm finding that really interesting because I'm just not used to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think to some degree, maybe everyone kind of goes through that. I mean, I don't want to say recently, but more recently anyway, like within the past couple years, like I've come out like on a different level about my recovery to just everyone. And I'm sure there were people thinking like, okay, this is like fucking crazy. You know, maybe they knew I had a problem, but this is on a different level. Or I thought I knew Jonathan, but this is like clearly I didn't. I think what you're touching on, Dan, is so important. You know, that almost being unshakable when you hear some of these things because if I go into a meeting or like if I'm sitting across from someone and they're telling me this story and I'm just like, oh my god, like you did that, I mean, how would that make them feel? I remember my first sponsor telling me like, look, man, like there's nothing you're going to tell me that I haven't heard before, and this guy had been around a while. And I was like, yeah, I kind of don't believe that. And like when we went through, my inventory with my 4-step the first time around, I was just waiting for the reaction
Right.
on his face as I was telling him the absolute worst things I've ever done in my life. And he was just like, uh-huh, okay, like,
Yeah.
come on,
Unfazed.
like
Totally.
yawning almost,
Right. Yeah.
like boring. What's next? So I do want to ask you, you mentioned, hosting these parties with celebrities and stuff like that. And I know you mentioned in your book, a moment where you met Mike Tyson. And so I want to ask you about that because I want to hear about that. I don't know this story. So tell us about that.
So I was running this magazine, and we were putting Mike Tyson on the cover of the magazine.
Okay.
Now were generally putting people like Brad Pitt or Bradley Cooper or Robert Downey Jr., these big Hollywood stars on the cover of the magazine.
Yeah.
But we were putting Mike Tyson on the cover of the magazine just because I found him to be like a fascinating cultural figure. I found him to be, he was certainly a polarizing figure at the
Sure.
time. But I believed, now this is me as an active addict, and this is relatively still early in my, like the heavy days of my drug use.
Okay.
But I believed in redemption, and I believed in second acts. And of course I still do.
Hmm.
And it was requested that I actually meet Mike Tyson. This was not normally the case, and I seldom met the people that we were putting on the cover of the magazine for any real reason. But Mike Tyson's team had said, "Hey, could you go meet Mike?" And I was like, "Sure, no problem." And I was to meet him on a rooftop of a building on 118th Street in New York City, which is Harlem. And on top of that building, Tyson kept pigeons. He had a pigeon coop.
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was training for what would have been one of his last professional fights. He was no longer the heavyweight champ. He had, this is post Evander Holyfield ear biting. He had been in jail. I think for rape. There were things that he was a very sort of he had been beaten down. And I took a handful of pills in the car on the way up from my office that morning, on my way up to see him. And by the time I got up to Harlem, these pills were kicking in. I was wearing a suit because I had a meeting that morning, and it was an oppressively hot September day, and like brutally hot. And so initially I couldn't find him. And so I was wandering around Harlem looking for this building that was kind of a derelict building. And I finally sort of like reach him. He calls down to me from the roof of this building, and I'm looking up at him into the hot sun, and there's like a whirl of pigeons flying above him. It was like something out of like a horrible Hitchcock film. And he's like, "Oh, I'm sending my buddy down to get you." And his buddy, by the time his buddy got down on the street, I was literally like swaying, like I really felt like I was going to tip over. And then we climbed these creaky stairs in a building that should have been condemned to the roof. And I meet Tyson, and we're talking, and we're looking up the whole time into the sun, watching these birds fly overhead. And I describe in my book, the whole roof of the building was like a Jackson Pollock of bird shit. It was just like splattered everywhere. And here's this guy, and he's super energetic, and he's talking to me, and I'm sweaty, and I'm dizzy, and I'm not really seeing straight. And it was almost as if like I had taken a punch from Mike Tyson in the ring, right? Like this is what it must feel like to stand across from him. Like I couldn't see straight. And I was like, "Hey, listen, like I gotta go, and like really abruptly ended this conversation, which I only barely remember, and kind of like made my way down these stairs of this like derelict building. I thought my foot was going to bust through one of the stairs, and I was going to go flying or like falling into the like basement. And I kind of burst out the door of this building onto the street, and I just vomit right there on the street. And this is how bad it had gotten. I had gotten to a point, right? You just talked about this a minute ago, Jonathan, where like the exterior looks like you're holding it together, right? Like from the outside looking in at me, I thought people saw someone that was together. You just said, "Oh, you were running a magazine, you were winning awards, you had a whatever high-paying job. You must have been a high-functioning addict." The reality was that I was an absolute mess. The reality was that as sick as I felt on the inside, I didn't really think, or at least I hoped, that people couldn't tell, because I was trying to do this job. I was trying to present myself as a sort of stable, responsible, present person, even to someone like Mike Tyson, who, let's face it, wasn't the most stable, responsible, present person in the
Yeah.
world, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh shit, I can con Mike Tyson. Oh my God. Like if I'm conning doctors, and family members and employers, surely I can convince a train wreck like Mike Tyson that I'm okay, right?
Yeah.
But I couldn't hold it together. And so it really, in many ways, in the chapter in the book where I write about this Tyson experience, I think is really powerful for me, because it shows just truly how that the joke was on me. Like I couldn't fool anyone ultimately, and it had gotten so bad that I couldn't stand outside and have a conversation for 30, 40 minutes with this guy and not think I was going to tip over and fall off the roof of this building that we were standing on.
Wow.
It had gotten just, listen, we talk about unmanageability. That's unmanageability.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like it. Wow. Yeah, I mean that's interesting, and I'm thinking about not moments, with Mike Tyson, but moments similar to that where it's like by all accounts it's a low point for sure, and but my guess would be is it you started to feel a little better at some point and you just kept going on doing what it is you do. And I had so many moments like that, being in the back of a cop car, being in a car wreck. And it's like there's this moment of like, wow, that was bad. And then literally the next second, it's like, well, I need to get high again.
Absolutely. We have these I'm never doing this again moments,
Hmm.
right? And by the way, we have them at different points in our lives. It could be something like oh man, I just ate a whole plate of French fries. Wow, man, I'm never doing that again. Or, I'm definitely not drinking like that again. Or, oh man, I'm done with carbs. Whatever it is,
Yeah.
with something that has a sort of a true, real kind of chemical grip on you, like opiates, I would say I am done. I am never doing that again. I think it's a miracle that I'm alive. And literally, I could go from 1 minute to the next,
Hmm.
just like that, and do it again. And I'll tell you something, Jonathan. When I finally got sober, my then wife, my now ex-wife, my then wife was pregnant with our oldest child. And she discovered that I had been lying to her for years and that I was using drugs. And she did, I think, what anyone in their right mind would have done. She said, you need to fix this. Don't come home. I ended up going to my mother's house down in Baltimore, where I grew up.
Okay.
And I spent 2 weeks down there, and I detoxed, and I went through all of the acute physical symptoms of withdrawal, and I attended my first 12-step meeting down there.
Hmm.
And I called the doctors that had been prescribing me the medication and told them that I was a drug addict and not to give me any pills anymore. And I called all but one. And after those 2 weeks of being clean and sober and having attended my first 12-step meeting, I got on a train from Baltimore back to my life in New York. And the moment that train pulled out of Baltimore, headed north, I called that one doctor that I didn't call to say that I was an addict. I called that doctor's office. I got a prescription. It was waiting for me at a pharmacy when I got back to New York. And I got off of that train after being sober for really the first time in years.
Hmm.
And I went and I picked up that prescription and I took pills. This is how powerful this disease is.
Yeah.
And it is, it will it is not going to let go. You have to be more powerful, right? You have to be, healthy. And I just wasn't ready. I
Hmm.
took pills for one more day and then I stopped, and I haven't used them since. And it has not been easy at times. But this is a fatal disease, Jonathan. It really is. And it is a powerful disease, and it will do everything in its power to outfox you. And so if I could sit down in Baltimore and detox and attend my first AA meeting and rat myself out to most of the doctors that I was getting drugs from and still come back to New York. And by the way, I'm only months away at this time from being a father for the first time.
Wow.
That's how strong it is.
Wow. I think so. I went back to the treatment center that I went through, and they're regularly watching these. It's called the Right Stuff. So if you guys are watching, here's your little shout out. But I was talking to a guy after this meeting last night, and I was explaining how important it is to keep that momentum. Because we start to feel a little bit better. And man, sometimes that can be one of the worst things, especially if I don't have a game plan in place where it's like, I'm going to call all the doctors. I'm going to have the meetings figured out as
Right.
soon as I go back to New York. What meetings? Where are they? I'm going to grab a sponsor. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Have that game. Because man, it's like, when we have these experiences and then we want to get better, and you did for a little while, and we don't stick with it, we're not likely to keep doing those things. It's like if I go to rehab and I don't have these things figured out, and if I don't take that action immediately, like in reality, what is the likelihood of me waiting a few weeks and then starting to go to meetings or then get plugged into a recovery community? It is not likely to happen. Unfortunately, it's a good and a bad thing. This disease is so predictable, right? Like what it looks like is probably about to happen, a relapse or whatever. That's likely what is going to happen.
I think when I was actively using, I read a number of addiction memoirs. I watched I would watch movies. I remember watching the movie with about Ray Charles,
Yeah.
where Jamie Foxx plays. I think it's just called Ray,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he sort of kicks this heroin habit. Or I would read books about people kind of um, journeying to recovery,
Hmm.
and it would give me hope, and it would show me that there is a path out. Maybe I wasn't ready to take that path at the time that I was reading those books or watching those films, but they inspired me, and they showed me that there was a path. And I think if there's anything that people take away from my book, whether they are actively using or whether someone in their life is actively using, a child, a spouse, a parent, a friend, a colleague, whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
that there is a way out. And so there's that piece of it. I also think that I'm I really want to destigmatize this addiction. And I could say all addiction, of course, but I'm not even speaking that broadly. I really want to help because there are others out there, kind of, I think, bravely, like yourself and others, and many others, thankfully, kind of talking about their struggle rather openly and sharing their experiences. And so I wanted to write the book for that reason also,
Mm.
like, hey, look, I was a normal dude, and I got addicted to these pills, and that addiction progressed in a pretty sort of extraordinary way. But I was still, going out to dinner, and I was still, showing up for the meeting. Like, you never know who's struggling, and for there to be the stigma, and maybe it's getting better, and I think to some degree it is, but I just think it's really important that we demystify what's going on here, and we destigmatize what's going on here, because this is impacting, millions of people, whole communities in some instances. But I think you're going to be hard pressed to find anyone that isn't within a few degrees of separation from
Yeah.
someone who has been touched by
Man,
this.
you took the words right out of my mouth. Like if you think about that, that 6 degrees of separation, so to speak, I mean, man, and it's hear it more and more, and not even with people in the program, people that I just know, family or friends. It's like every day. And I think that it's being talked about more, which is so important.
Which is great. Which is great.
Yeah, which that conversation is happening, and thank God, because it is just, there are some serious multiple epidemics going on these days. It's not just the opiate epidemic. I mean, I think people forget, that more people die from alcohol every year. And
Absolutely.
it's just crazy. But I really love that, man, because I think that's so important. These are our kids, these are our, moms, dads, friends of friends. It's not the guy. I really like how you said it. Like you were just a normal guy, and it's not the guy that many of us pictured like I did, that's, sleeping under a bridge and was raised, with a terrible terrible family life and all these things. Like, no, that's not what this deal is.
It
Not what
is,
this is
it, it
about.
is, it does not discriminate. It is the great equalizer, and it is merciless. And so if my voice, now joining the sort of chorus of others that are talking about this, can help educate to even the smallest degree people on this addiction, and about this disease, then that's what I want people to take away from the book. That, like, hey, listen, like, you you shouldn't be judging people like this. We should be banding together to try to figure out the most effective ways to help people like this, and more importantly, the most effective ways to prevent things like this happening. Right? We need to focus on prevention, education, and treatment, and I think it's incredibly important. So I'll use whatever opportunity I have with respect to the to the book, to talk about those things.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah. The prevention. Let's put a stop to this before it even gets to this point for, the next generation of
Absolutely.
people, especially. So, but before we wrap up here, Dan, I want to ask you, what is one piece of advice that you'd like to share with the sober nation?
Wow. You know what? Like, be be as honest as you possibly can, certainly with others, but with yourself, about what you're feeling, what you're dealing with. We talk about in the 12 steps, we give out 12-step programs, we give out chips or coins or whatever you want to call them, and they say, to thine own self be true on them. And I think that's really unbelievably important. You may think that you can bullshit anyone,
Hmm.
family, a spouse, kids, parents, employers, doesn't matter. It's when you really start bullshitting yourself that things have gotten, like, to a very low. And so I think just be honest about what you're feeling. And even now in recovery, I have to stop and think, like, wait a minute, what's really going on with me that made me lash out at someone, or that made me yell at my kid for no reason, or, like, God, driving, when I'm driving and someone kind of cuts me off or is going slow in front of me. Like, I have to take a deep breath to stop myself from leaning on the horn or turning into a giant asshole.
Hmm.
And then I'll stop and say, okay, like, Dan, like, let's just, like, do a quick inventory check, and just, like, like, be honest, like what's going on that's making you behave this way? So I would say, be honest. Be honest. It's easier said than done,
It
right?
is.
And I certainly don't do it uh, all the time, but when I catch myself starting to bullshit people, or certainly when I catch myself starting to bullshit myself, it really helps keep me in check.
Yeah, man, that is such awesome advice. And I think that's a great place. That's great advice for anyone, but especially for someone that's new, and even more so that might be going into a 12-step program, because the principle behind the first step is honesty, right? And you just nailed it. It's to thine own self be true. Like I've got to be honest with myself first and foremost. So awesome advice, man. Dan's book, As Needed for Pain, will be available on Amazon February 11th. Be sure to grab it. I'm
It's
excited
available
to.
now, actually. It's even available before February 11th.
Oh, it's available now. Okay, we'll pick it up now, and I'm excited to read it as well. So, Dan, thanks again for coming on with me today, man. This was absolutely awesome.
Jonathan, I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Be sure to check out the show notes for all the info from today's episode. Sober Nation FM is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Sobriety Engine is a free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. This show is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle while supporting your sobriety, you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And again, whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. Nation, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.